background here. Much appreciated. There's always some last-minute technical difficulties. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour, mes collègues. My name is Mary Coyle. I'm delighted to join our Senators for Climate Solutions co-chair, Senator Jim Quinn, in welcoming you to this information session on the Canadian Youth Climate Assembly. If you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself? I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone participating today, and a very special thank you to the newest members of our group, Senator Dillon, Senator Hay, Senator Inch, and Senator Wilson. I want to thank senators and staff who've completed our member survey. Encourage any members and staff who have not yet responded to the survey to please do so before Monday, June 16th. Your input is very important to us, and it will help guide us over the summer as we plan for Senator for Climate Solutions 2.0 to be launched this fall. We'd like to acknowledge that those of us currently in Ottawa are gathered on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize and honor Indigenous peoples all across Canada. Okay, colleagues, I am barely containing my excitement. I am thrilled to be hosting this information session on the Canadian Youth Climate Assembly scheduled to take place this summer and fall. Many of you will recall the general information session we hosted on Citizens Assembly and on climate assemblies in June of 2022, 3 years ago. A Citizens Assembly on Climate in Canada was a dream of ours at that time, and I won't bore you with the details of all that has transpired over those 3 years, but suffice it to say that this is a powerful opportunity for us to be involved in. This very important deliberative democracy opportunity to engage with and hear from Canadian youth on climate action. Both Peter MacLeod and Graham Smith presented to us in that general information session 3 years ago, and they are part of our panel today. We are very honored to be involved in this Youth Citizens Assembly and to be associated with such capable professionals. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Peter MacLeod is the executive advisor for the 2025 Canadian Youth Climate Assembly, and he will chair the project's Advisory and Oversight Committee, which you'll hear more about. He's the founder and principal of MAS LBP and one of Canada's leading experts on public engagement and deliberative democracy. Since its founding in 2007, MAS has completed more than 200 major policy projects for governments and public agencies across Canada while popularizing the use of civic lotteries and citizens' assemblies and earning international recognition for its work. Between 2020 and 2022, he chaired the Canadian Citizens' Assemblies on Democratic Expression. Graham Smith is the chair of the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies, NACA, which aims to improve the commissioning, design, implementation, and impact of climate assemblies using evidence, knowledge exchange, and dialogue. He is also a professor of politics and director of the Center for the Study of Democracy at the University of Westminster and the chair of the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development. Graham is an international expert on climate assemblies and was recognized by Apolitical as one of the top 100 most influential academics in government. He's the author of Can Democracy Safeguard the Future? I'm making apologies right now, not for Graham, because he's wonderful, but we have a technical difficulty with interpretation. So Graham will be speaking in English, and I apologize that we will not have interpretation, but his slides have interpretation on them. So that's an apology in advance. And we also have the wonderful Jasmine Kay. She's a director at MAS LBP. She will be the chair of the 2025 Canadian Youth Climate Assembly. She spent most of her professional life in the not-for-profit sector, on the front line of settlement agencies working with English language learners, and more recently leading strategic projects at United Way of Greater Toronto, like the Strengthening Community Assets and Local Economies Lab and the Inclusive Local Economic Opportunities Initiative. A very warm welcome to Peter, Graham, and Jasmine, as we launch this information session for our colleagues on the Canadian Youth Climate Assembly that's here at last. Thank you.
Hello, Senator Coyle. Thanks so much for that really wonderful introduction. Really so pleased and appreciative to be having some time with all of you today. Peter's going to be joining us in 2 minutes. His connection has dropped, so he is just heading back to the studio very quickly. And so as a result, we're going to switch up our presentation, our plan a little bit, and would actually like to invite Graham to kick us off and tell us a little bit about all the work that is happening in Climate Assembly world out there, largely in Europe. I'm going to, Graham, start your presentation, and again, with apologies that there won't be interpretation for this, but Graham will start us off, and then we'll bring Peter back into the conversation to kind of set us up with a bit of information about the deliberative wave, more about MASS, and then about the SICA project specifically. So Graham, over to you, please, and thank you.
And once again, everybody, apologies. My headset didn't arrive, and my headset didn't arrive, and my computer has gone down. I'm actually on someone else's computer, so I'm just pleased to have even made it here today. My name, as I said, my name is Graham Smith. I run something called the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies, which has been funded by the European Climate Foundation. I'll say a little bit about the work that we do and place it in a slightly wider context. Next slide, Jasmine. You've already heard, You've already heard from Senator Coyle about what we do. Our role is to try and build the knowledge base on climate assemblies, what works, what doesn't work, and our main focus is trying to achieve impact. And I'll talk to you today, particularly towards the end of the presentation, about what we've learned in relation to impact. Just in case there is anyone on the call who doesn't know, and Peter will come back to this, when we're talking about climate assemblies or citizens assemblies, we're talking about institutions that select their membership through democratic lottery. So this is a really diverse group of people who have very similar characteristics to the broader Canadian population. It's really unusual to see that sort of diversity in a room. And the second thing is they spend time together, learning, deliberating, and coming together to make recommendations. So that's what we mean. Well, that's what I mean by climate assemblies. That's what you're going to be doing in Canada, particularly focused on a youth population, which is, I think, really exciting. Jasmine, the next slide. So why all this interest in climate assemblies? And I think there's a number of reasons why, and we're starting to see some evidence, and we can talk about this later about these things are happening. The first is by bringing citizens into the assembly, into climate decision making, we actually end up with more robust and ambitious climate policy. There's two reasons for that. Robust because we're actually creating climate policy that responds to the needs and interests of citizens. Very often, policy is being made at some distance from the lives of citizens, and their lived experience isn't brought into decision making. And ambitious because it turns out when citizens actually are given this opportunity to deliberate, they look for more progressive, more forward-thinking policy than governments typically are implementing at the moment. This is a space, because we're bringing citizens together, in which we can challenge social and climate injustices. It's a really amazing space for breaking political deadlocks around areas where politicians haven't necessarily been willing to deal with existing trade-offs. This kind of space helps really reduce polarization within the assembly. There are debates about whether it achieves it in wider society, but we bring a diverse group of people who would otherwise often be at each other on social media, or who would never even meet together. And it through this carefully designed process, we actually create mutual respect between people from very, very different perspectives. It increases legitimacy potentially and public acceptance of climate action, because citizens can see that citizens like themselves have been involved in the process. And finally, it generates more politically confident citizenry. One thing we know from all of these assemblies that have been run in Europe is that the citizens that come out of these assemblies are really engaged on climate and really engaged wanting to do more. So this is overall a method for both reinvigorating climate action, but I think equally important, reinvigorating democracy. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So in Europe, we've had around, this map is slightly old, but we've had around 200 assemblies all across Europe. They've mostly been based in the north of Europe, but they're gradually spreading south and into southern Europe. And what's really interesting, particularly, is the stars that are on there, because they're all the national assemblies that have happened. And currently, as I say, this needs to be updated. We've had about 15 national assemblies across Europe. And I think that's really unusual on participatory processes, because typically they work at local and regional level. But because of the way that assemblies work, through bringing together a random selection of citizens, we can actually see them working very effectively on scale. Okay, can you next slide, Jasmine? Now, I'll show you talk some more about this and show you an image in a second. But one thing that's really interesting about these assemblies is they're never really the same. They tend to change, the context changes, what they're asked to do changes, the way they're organized changes. So, for example, in terms of commissioners, we've seen commissioners who are from the core executive, from presidents and prime ministers. We've seen them from ministries. We've seen some from Parliament, and you're going to join that. That's going to be a really interesting experiment. And then fourth, we've seen them being organised from within civil society. And the governance structures have varied between them, who's involved, which stakeholders are involved. Their remits have varied we'll talk some more about this, from mitigation to adaptation. The resources available and the time available for citizens to deliberate has varied, and that means the work you can do varies. If you're only giving citizens a short period of time, you can't expect so much of them, obviously, if they have longer periods. The commitments to follow up have changed, and this is something I want to raise towards the end of the presentation, that in some places governments have committed to respond within 3 months or within a year, and kind of like given a really distinct moment where they will justify the actions that they've taken. And I think when a parliament organises something like this, we've got to think quite carefully about what it means to follow up, what it means to commit to action. We've seen different ways of involving members, assembly members, after the process. Sometimes processes just stop, assembly members go home. Other times assembly members will be involved in processes of oversight and in terms of trying to take forward those recommendations. And as I'll say more about in a minute, we've seen lots of different impacts on different areas of society. Next slide, please. This slide gives you, this is the 15 assemblies that have happened at national level so far, gives you a sense of the variation in terms of both the time, the length of the bar is the amount of time that these assemblies have spent deliberating. So in France and in Scotland, they actually had 8 weekends, which is really incredible amount of time to work on this. And at the other end, we've seen processes which have been like 2 or 3 days. So there's a variation here, and I think that the Canadian one fits somewhere in the middle of all of this. And the other thing that this graphic shows is that some of the assemblies haven't been organised by political institutions. They've been organised by civil society. And so we're seeing a variation of practice here. The one that was organised in the UK, and we might come back to this later, was actually organised by parliamentary committees. So it has some resonance with what you're doing at the moment. The next slide, please. And in terms of impacts, those impacts have varied, again, because of the way that they've been organised. And one of the important things is NOC has been around now for 4 years. So we're actually now able to collect really much more systematically to collect evidence of impact. And we've definitely seen impact on policy. And lots of people in France thought that the French Convention didn't have that much impact. But actually looking back 3 or 4 years later, we can actually, 5 years later, actually, we can see that about 20% of the proposals have been implemented in full, and another 40% have been modified to some degree. So there has been impact in France. We've definitely seen impact in Ireland, where their climate change strategy was completely influenced by what had happened amongst the citizens. We've seen impacts on institutions. For example, in the UK, the Climate Change Committee, which is our independent committee that reviews what government is doing in relation to net zero, they are now using deliberative processes themselves, having experienced a national climate assembly. In terms of public discourse, we've seen big debates in countries like France and Austria. When we've seen assemblies happen, that it's been picked up by media, it's led to big debates around climate policy and about the use of citizens' assemblies. And we have some great evidence that participants have long-term effect. In the UK, we surveyed people 2 years afterwards, and they were more committed to climate, more involved in terms of climate behaviours than they had been at the end of the assembly, which for me I found absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. So what are the key drivers for impact? What are the ways that we can make sure that these assemblies have impact? And so from the various assemblies we've looked at, we've kind of pulled out 3 things that we think are absolutely critical. The first is getting the remit right, getting the appropriate remit, asking citizens to do something that is manageable within the time that they've got and which is appropriate for the current political situation. We've seen different remits, some that are very broad, like how can we achieve our Paris commitments, right the way through to very tight ones around things like energy poverty or particular green spaces. So they vary very considerably in terms of the breadth of the remit, and they are varied in terms of whether they've been focused on mitigation. Most assemblies have focused on mitigation, but some have started to look at adaptation. And I know this is a discussion that you're probably having at the moment about what should the focus be. We've got experience that assemblies can deal with both mitigation and adaptation, although sometimes mixing it can be challenging. The second thing, and actually I think the most important, is how the assembly lands. And this is about how it's integrated into the political system. Because an assembly that is organised by a government, organised by the core executive, is very different than one organised by Parliament, organised by the Senate, which is very different from one organised by a civil society organisation. So it's really critical to build an impact strategy, to know what you're going to do with the recommendations afterwards. I have more to say about that in a second. And the third issue is around transparency and communication. It's really important. I know that Marcel BP are completely committed to this, so it's not going to be a problem, about being transparent about what's happening in terms of how the selection has happened, what is the evidence that people are hearing, how does the process work, and actually communicating that in order that relevant stakeholders who might otherwise be skeptical of the process or actually can understand what's going on. And then just a couple of final slides. So first, I've already said this in many ways, but just to reinforce, we've got plenty of evidence that citizens can do this work. Citizens are willing and able to do this kind of work and come up with recommendations that are really valuable. The question is, can we integrate those recommendations into the decision-making process? Can the commissioning authority, which in this case is the Senate, integrate it into its work? Can it be integrated by other stakeholders? And so I guess my last comment in the next slide is that I would really say to you, don't get just fixated about the assembly. Don't just think about the assembly as what we as senators need to focus on. We need to spend as much time and resources on thinking about what's going to happen after the assembly has delivered its recommendations. So yes, it's exciting to engage the citizens. Yes, it's exciting to find out what they have to say, but we need to have a plan. We need to have a strategy for how this is now then going to be used within the Senate to help shape your work and hopefully shape the work of others. And one final slide, just to say that there's lots of evidence, lots of material on the NOCA website that you can get in terms of support for the Assembly. I've also written a very short book based on the last 3 years of experience of NOCA, which is available as open access. It's free to download. There's even an audio book, which is free. And so if you want to get a bit more background on the lessons that we've learned, the sort of things I've been saying today, please download the book, share it, and hopefully it will be a useful resource for you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today. I'm so excited that you're doing this, and you couldn't be in safer hands than with Peter and Jasmine. So hopefully I can pass over to Peter now.
You certainly can, Graham.
He's disappeared from nowhere.
And thank you very much. I'm going to try and move through a number of slides as well, and I appreciate everyone's indulgence. I assumed that I might be forgiven, given that I'm speaking to the Senate Climate Caucus, because I was dropping off my my kindergarten-age daughter this morning. Thought that the school playground might be an appropriate backdrop. Turns out Wi-Fi wasn't as strong as I might have hoped, and so bicycled the 2 kilometers back to my office. So here I am, full strength, and very happy to see all of you again and to hear my wonderful UK colleague Graham Smith, such an authority on this really important and evolving work. I'm going to share some slides and just rewind a little bit because the story I want to start with is a story actually about Canadian success. And I know that is, you know, a very bold claim for any Canadian to make. After all, we're supposed to be a little bit more meek about our accomplishments. But I think it's really important for everyone to appreciate that Canada's initial Citizens' Assembly in British Columbia, now 20 years ago, while it never resulted in the electoral change that many British Columbians had hoped for, it has nevertheless helped change the world. The advent of the BC and then the Ontario Citizens' Assembly, quickly followed by the Netherlands and then Ireland, is, I would claim, one of Canada's most significant and successful democratic innovations. And I want to just tell a little bit of that story to help contextualize why we think it's so significant that we're going to be connecting Canada's first assembly on climate for young adults to your important work in Canada's true deliberative chamber. So this is a photograph from 2004. Many of you will be familiar with the story of the BC Citizens' Assembly. Randomly selected members, a man and a woman representing each BC riding, came together over the better part of a year under the leadership of Jack Blaney, then president of Simon Fraser University, and ultimately recommended change that went to referendum. Well, the referendum achieved 58% support. It didn't meet the 60% threshold that the Campbell government had required. But fortunately, a man named David Farrell from Ireland had been invited to come and talk about Ireland's electoral system. And he went back to Ireland so excited by what he saw that he managed to convince the Irish Prime Minister to run a series of citizens' assemblies that ultimately resulted in some successful referenda legalizing same-sex marriage in Ireland and providing access to reproductive services for women. As you've heard a little bit from my colleague Graham, that was the assembly heard around the world, and it had major and transformative impacts throughout Europe. Because if you can deal with such sensitive topics in Ireland and you can find overwhelming public consensus supporting their recommendations, then a lot of European leaders said, we have some work for you as well. But those citizens' assemblies have continued in Canada. Since 2004, there have been approximately 55 different long-form deliberative processes like assemblies that have engaged more than 2,000 Canadians at the local, provincial, and national level. So I want to just quickly unpack exactly what a citizens' assembly is. After all, it seems intuitive. We know what citizens are. We have a sense about what an assembly can be. But the reality is that citizens' assemblies follow a fairly, at this point, well-established structure. They are focused. Unlike yourselves, they don't have to cover the waterfront of issues that are of interest to the Senate's members and obviously forthcoming from government legislation. They get to focus on one topic. In a sense, they're a bit like a much smaller royal commission that is populated not by experts and former judges and politicians, but of randomly selected citizens. So we say it's a big ask and a clear task. After all, we're asking people to give us no fewer than 4 Saturdays of their time, typically 40 hours cumulative. And we're asking not just those who are interested and are first in queue to show up. We run what's called a civic lottery, so that from amongst a large pool of candidates, we randomly select for attributes that help the assembly match the demographics of the population they represent. So from the outset, it's half men, half women, balanced by age, geography, and takes into account other socioeconomic factors. Lastly, it's deliberative. And it's deliberative, you might say, deliberative plus. What's the plus? At the end of the day, the members have to find their way towards consensus. It's not enough to have a vote where 50% plus one carries the day. Citizens' assemblies are not only helping find common ground on complicated issues, they are increasingly seen by governments as a source of democratic legitimacy. So often we invoke public consultations, we invoke surveys. Citizens' assemblies are seen increasingly as a more robust process to demonstrate consensus on what are often very complex issues. So it's not simply a yes-no binary question. It's actually coming up with a range of recommendations, as we often see coming out of parliamentary or Senate committees, or again, various kinds of public inquiries and royal commissions. Citizens' assemblies, and this is why I love this work so much, is that they challenge what I'm afraid has become a dominant cultural assumption about the public, that people are just too busy, that they're not well enough informed, and that they're too polarized to engage in productive political conversations. Having chaired more than 40 of these assemblies myself in just about every region of the country and nationally, let me assure you that the claims we make about polarization are surprisingly thin. Once we get Canadians together in a room, they have the chance to explore their values together, and they have the opportunity to hear from experts holding different perspectives, have their questions answered quickly. They work towards a common basis for agreement. This is what it looks like. You'll note the brown envelopes. It's a little reminiscent of the CRA. This is one of the mechanisms that has proved effective in recruitment. If I send letters on brown paper rather than white paper, I get a 1% bump in my response rates. You'll see government logos on these, and typically we have a 5 to 7% response rate. And if you are at all familiar with the response rates for effectively direct marketing, that is exceptionally high, especially when we're asking people to put their lives on hold and give us those 4, 5, 6 Saturdays of their time. So typically, if we send out 10,000 letters, we have 500 people who volunteered. And even if that response pool skews towards a certain demographic, the civic lottery, by which we blindly choose the members to meet those demographic attributes, that evens everything out so that no one group predominates. A lot of us assume that the way to work with groups looks a little bit like brainstorming, that we start with good ideas and inspiration. Citizens' assemblies start with values, then they consider the problem, and only in the latter quarter of the exercise do we actually focus on the recommendations. I think it was maybe Einstein who had the adage that if you need to solve a problem, you should spend about 55 minutes of the hour defining and understanding the problem. We've seen that same principle be very useful. When members have the chance to really explore an issue, then actually cashing out considered recommendations becomes so much easier. Here's a photograph of one of the citizens reference panels that we ran, I believe, in 2016, almost 10 years ago, which helped inform ultimately the design of the pharmacare legislation that was passed during the last Parliament. And of course, you'll recognize the Canadian Museum of History as their backdrop. That is Canada in a room if Canada is represented by, I think, 40 odd people. More recently, a lot of the core of Canada's online harms legislation, again, sadly lost when Parliament was prorogued, was developed through 3 different citizens' assemblies that were working in concert with Canadian Heritage and the Commission on Democratic Expression that was chaired by former Chief Justice Beverly McLachlin. Beverly McLachlin said frequently and generously that the Commission's recommendations were improved and were strengthened as a result, and perhaps made more ambitious as a result of the contributions of the members of our Assembly. And this, a good news story. This is one of 5 what we call priorities panels that met across the country as part of a massive initiative called Our Care Nos Soins. It was an exercise to talk about primary care access across Canada, funded by Health Canada. It resulted just a little less than 10 days ago with Ontario's Primary Care Act, championed by former parliamentarian and Minister of Health Jane Philpott, and the principles that the members identified were codified in legislation. But we're talking today about our upcoming Canadian Youth Climate Assembly. And as part of our exercise on online harms, we convened this beautiful group of young Canadians at the Museum of Human Rights. This was Canada's digital panel, and they are randomly selected high school students from across the country who also had the opportunity to contribute their recommendations to that larger exercise. So one of the things that Graham may have alluded to is that in France, the Climate Assembly, its most recent assembly on physician-assisted dying, has actually been connected to the 3rd chamber of the French Parliament. And that has become the natural home for national citizens' assemblies in France. It becomes the commissioning body, it becomes the recipient of recommendations. And I would like to think that if we do a good enough job with this assembly, then Canada's deliberative chamber may wish to become a future home for future assemblies here as well. So now I want to very quickly, in just a few minutes, introduce to you what it is we have planned and how you can help us ensure that young Canadians across the country are aware of this exercise and have the opportunity to volunteer. Senator Coyle has talked about why she believes in this exercise. She's been a tireless champion for connecting the views of young Canadians to the work of this caucus, as well as your colleagues in the all-party climate caucus in the House of Commons. And we're excited for the opportunity to bring forward the report. As Graham has already mentioned, it builds on the work and success of other climate assemblies, principally in Europe. Here's what we have planned. Recruiting 36 randomly selected young adults ages 18 to 25 who have lived in Canada for the last 5 years. Formal citizenship is not a requirement, but residency over the last 5 years is. We will be selecting for a wide range of demographic attributes, which are listed below. But let me assure you, one of the guiding principles of our team is to ensure the widest possible sense of equity and inclusion to ensure that the voices that come forward really represent the diversity of young Canadians. Our mandate, Graham talked about how important the remit is. The question we will be putting to the Assembly is, what do young Canadians want Parliament and parliamentarians to do to meet Canada's climate commitments in a way that reflects their values and priorities? There's a lot actually packed into that simple statement. It means that these young Canadians are going to need to articulate their values. They're going to need to articulate a set of priorities, and then they're going to need to understand what you, not as government, but as parliamentarians, can do to advance those priorities. To assist them, we're developing a very detailed curriculum, and we're supported by a wide range of advisors, including Professor Smith. During that time, they will be learning about the role of MPs and senators. They will be examining the numerous climate plans that Canada already has in place, as well as its international commitments. It's going to be talking about how the perspectives of Gen Z varies across Canada. They're going to be doing a deep dive into the major sources of emissions, and they're going to be reflecting on the wide range of policy tools that governments can use to reduce these emissions. Ultimately, that's towards developing a series of consensus recommendations. Here's when and how it's taking place. We will meet virtually on 3 dates in August, on the 9th, the 23rd, and then September the 6th. And then we will be bringing the members of the Assembly to Ottawa, where we will be convening at the Global Centre for Pluralism and, of course, visiting Canada's Senate, beginning on the evening of September the 17th and carrying through until September 21st. On October 4th, we intend to reconvene at the Assembly to review recommendations, and we'll look forward to an opportunity to present the report. Our advisors come from a range of organizations, those with deep climate expertise, those with deep expertise in engaging young people, like Montreal's terrific Apathy is Boring, which for the past 20 years has been proving the case that apathy is boring and that young Canadians are ready to leap into action when given the opportunity. We're again grateful for Senator Coyle's participation as an ex officio member, as well as our colleagues at Environmental Leadership Canada, who are part of the partnership making this happen. Our anticipated impact, it's to create a forum for young Canadians and parliamentarians to learn from one another, to establish a clear consensus on the part of young adults in Canada about the climate priorities they wish parliamentarians to pursue. And we want to demonstrate the importance of getting young people involved in a very substantive way when it comes to these major policy questions. I mentioned a moment ago Environmental Leadership Canada. They're known to many of you as the hosts of the climate internship program that exists in Parliament, as well as other youth-facing initiatives. And of course, we're grateful for the partnership with your caucus. We've been generously supported by the Trottier Foundation, the Rodeberg Foundation, and the Catherine Donnelly Foundation. So it's entirely philanthropic money that is removing all of the barriers for young Canadians, wherever they live, to participate. I'm going to hand to my colleague, Jasmine, who in just 3 minutes will tell you a little bit about how the members are going to be convened, but you're also welcome to pop open a browser now, steer yourself towards climatecan25.ca, and that's where you will find information about the process. Jasmine, I'll keep advancing the slides and I'll pass to you.
Thank you.
Jasmine is our chair, of course, of the Assembly.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for this. So Peter mentioned that what we're trying to do is kind of build a pretty robust pool of volunteers from which we'll select those 36 members. So we're kind of working to attract that pool in 4 different ways. So we will send out that brown envelope that you saw earlier to about 3,000 households across Canada. We're also building a social media campaign that will include Instagram and TikTok videos. We're working with some influencers to develop video content that does actually include some testimonials from some of those Youth Assembly members that worked with us on the Digital Rights and Safety Assembly. And then we're working through a range of partners across the country who have strong relationships kind of with youth constituencies to help get the word out. And we might have a gentle ask of all of you as well. And we're also going to be running a targeted online survey to kind of attract youth into the pool. All of that to say, we're hoping to build a fairly robust pool from which we will select those 36 members. And what you can see here are 2 kind of screenshots of our working representation model. And you'll see that we're working to balance across age, between 18 to 25-year-old category, gender, race and ethnicity, as well as some other attributes, sociodemographic attributes, including sort of sexuality, disability, and language. And then, of course, geographic representation. So wanting to ensure that we have good representation from across the country, all the provinces, all the territories, as well as balance for kind of urban and rural kind of perspectives and experiences. The one piece that is not included on either of these screenshots is the fact that we will also be looking to try and balance across kind of the different perspectives that youth might have and knowledge around climate action and climate change. So we're also kind of assessing for that as we draw from that proverbial hat. So how can you help? Well, become a little informed. So visit the website. We will be updating it with materials as they come online. Would love it if you folks can help us promote the opportunity on social media. And if you are connected to local, provincial, or national networks that can help us get this opportunity in front of young adults in Canada, would deeply appreciate hearing about who we might be able to tap. The recruitment closes on July 18th, so we have a little more than a month to build this pool. We soft launched earlier this week and are working to build with greater intensity and frequency as the deadline approaches. Okay, Peter, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jasmine. And one of the things I just want to reassure everyone of is that the assembly, of course, is conducted impeccably in both official languages, and Jasmine will also be joined by a Francophone co-chair who also has some climate expertise. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Senator Coyle and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much to all three of our special guests. That was a lot of ground to cover, and this is very exciting. I'm going to hand it over to our Senators for Climate Solutions co-chair, Jim Quinn, to moderate the Q&A. Over to you, Jim.
Merci beaucoup, Mary, et merci beaucoup pour les présentations.
Thanks very much, Mary, and thank you so much for those very interesting presentations.
On time limits, the last call we had, I wasn't such a stringent chair. This is such a fascinating topic. If you have questions, please indicate by raising your hand. I'll be watching the screen, the virtual hand. And maybe just to kick things off, I'll take the prerogative of a co-chair and ask, this is exciting. This is one of the most exciting discussions I think we've had as a group in terms of engaging young people, engaging citizens across the board. The first question I wrote down for me was that, we don't hear a lot about citizen assemblies. How can we make it better known? Because I would think that based on this discussion that you presented this morning, people will want to be engaged. They'll want to be part of that democratic process of legislative building. And it certainly would be a value added to our Canadian Parliament, both upper and lower chambers. How do we do that? How do we get the word out?
Well, I think your support for this first initiative is a major step towards that, and doing whatever you can to identify the youth serving networks, again, with a focus on 18 to 25 in the provinces you represent, and encouraging them to promote this to young people would be an enormous benefit. One of the things that we say at Mass is that people want a say, but they're also willing to serve. And the problem isn't that we ask too much of people, it's that we ask too little. When we ask a lot of people to step up, to serve, to represent their communities, to work on hard issues and find common ground, Canadians, we actually are joiners. We'll stick our red and white mitts up in the air, and I hope the Senate will contemplate other opportunities to learn from some of the jurisdictions we've mentioned today that have incorporated these kinds of deliberative processes as part of their legislative culture.
Thank you. And I want to remind colleagues, you can also post questions in the chat box. I'm trying to monitor that as well. I don't see any hands up because I have a series of questions actually based on this presentation, and I'll come to the last part of that. And no, I'm going to go to Senator Coyle. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me all right, Jim?
Yes.
Okay. One of my questions for anybody here, Peter, Jasmine, or Graham, we want to make sure, as we've heard, that this effort is a really good use of the time of these 36 young people, that the work that they put into it, the work that we're putting into it, is going to have maximum impact. And I know that Graham has told us the importance of the upfront planning, so that, when those recommendations come to us twice, one in an unpolished form on the 21st of September and the next time in a more polished report form in October, between now and then, obviously we're doing some things, but what is your advice in terms of Senators for Climate Solutions with our Senate colleagues, with our Senate committees, with our Senate infrastructure, and with our relationship with the All-Party Climate Caucus, advice that you might have from other assemblies where you have seen really effective impact and making it very much worth the while of those participants?
Graham?
Once again, apologies for just speaking in English. It's I haven't got the headset. I think it is going to be a challenge because you're Parliament rather than the executive. That we have to accept that from the start. I think it's really critical that you try to arrange some set piece moments when you as senators respond to the. It would be good to make that commitment up front, that you will have a formal response to the young people as part of it. So that's one thing that I think you should do. Then you're the specialists in how to do this stuff. You're the specialists in trying to figure this out. But if you can create moments when this becomes a topic of consideration both within the Senate and the House of Commons. It's very strange for me to talk about the House of Commons in somewhere else, but the House of Commons in Canada. Then that through your relationships with the members of the House of Commons, then I think that's critical. I would also do whatever work you can do to raise the profile of this within the government and within the administration of the government, because there will be supporters of this initiative in those places. Your challenge is trying to get them to commit to do something formally. Now, I think the fact that you're working with young people, with young adults, gives you more of a chance to do that, because this is a group who everyone recognises are often unheard, and people are looking for opportunities to do that. So this is actually where you, as political actors, have much more knowledge of where you can make these interventions in your system. My real recommendation is do this work now rather than wait until the Assembly delivers. So do that raising of awareness work, do that work with other places where they might agree to formally respond to it. Get that commitment now before the end, because otherwise you'll be running to keep up.
Thank you for that. Senator Surratt?
Yes, thank you. Great presentation, and of course is the topic of great interest to, all Canadians for sure, and around the world, and especially youth. As a former university president that transformed the university campus largely using renewable energy, I saw the interest of the young people on this topic. I'm just curious as to whether you considered approaching or working collaboratively with community colleges, CEGEPs, universities, as that seems to be the age group that we're talking about here, 18 to 25.
Thank you very much, Senator. Yes, we are going to be and have identified all of the networks through which we can reach universities and colleges across the country to promote this opportunity to their students. We're also conscious of the proportion of Canadians of that age range that are in post-secondary education, and intend to reflect that as well, both in the outreach and ultimately representation on the Assembly. But absolutely, it's the perfect vector. You go to where the people are, and many young Canadians, fortunately, are availing themselves of the wonderful post-secondary opportunities.
Thank you. And Senator Pate, you're next, please.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It is fascinating, but I want to come back to something you said early on. You mentioned that the division doesn't appear to manifest itself in the assemblies that you do, and yet it's very evident that the folks who participate in these sorts of events are likely of, although varying, certain demographics. And I'm curious as to what kind of material you've collected, what kind of evidence about who is participating, because many of us who engage with youth know that to actually engage with the youth who are most on the margins, most likely to be in situations where they feel disaffected, are not engaging in these processes. So I'm just curious, I understand during the process you get that kind of feedback, but how are you documenting which demographics you're including and which demographics are participating? Because it's not the vast majority of young people in this country who are ending up in university even.
That is very true, and again, it really returns us to the question of the networks that we're using for the purposes of outreach. And as Jasmine explained, we've got 4 ways of doing this. One is to the randomly selected 3,000 households that have been identified by Canada Post as having people in that demographic. And the letter is very specifically written to invite whoever receives it to pass it along to that young person. Social media, of course, captures a wide array of people right now. I mentioned we'd be reaching through networks to post-secondary institutions, but as a board member of the YMCA GTA, we're going to be working through organizations like the Y and others that are focused on serving youth, including youth at risk, to see that they not only have the opportunity to volunteer, but if they are randomly selected, are specially supported so that they feel confident in exercising their voice in this process. Our team runs what we call our civic concierge service, and that is all about meeting people where they are at and doing whatever is required to support them to bring their voice fully to the process. We think about ourselves as effectively being staffers to the members of an assembly who themselves are representatives. So in the past, we've worked with numerous groups that are working with people vulnerable, marginalized, to ensure that they are not only overrepresented in the assembly, but they're well supported in the assembly.
Thank you. And just before, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's just to reinforce what Peter was saying, the lottery process will actually make sure specifically that there are citizens, there are young people who are not in post school education that come from come from particular backgrounds. That is part of the selection process, because we're all aware that if you just open these things up, you'll just get those who are most politically active. So this is what is so special about this mechanism, is just to make sure that you have that broad diversity of the population.
Thank you. And just before I go to Senator Hay, I just want to acknowledge a comment that's in the chat box and build on it just a little bit, that we thank you for sharing the Citizens Assembly web information that's available. If there's other sources of information that would help us reach out to have, to youth, so if there are other sources of information, that'd be great. I think, Senator Coyle, if we could get that and share it with our colleagues. And now over to Senator Hay.
Oh, thank you so much. It is such an important topic, and I'm really keen on being involved. I said in the chat, and I think it's really important to say out loud, that at Kids Help Phone, which is a coast-to-coast virtual operation with almost 5 million interactions a year with young people, that climate anxiety, eco-anxiety is the 6th most significant reason why they are reaching out of all areas of Canada. And when they talk about their climate anxiety, they're also most likely to say that they feel hopeless. And hopelessness is a huge red flag to well-being. So I guess my question is, will there be a stream or a workshop or a focus in the Assembly around mental health and the impact of climate anxiety on the well-being of young people, which in fact will impact the future of Canada in reality?
Thank you, Senator. That is such a sobering and important statistic that you've shared. I just noted that down. And yes, the question of climate anxiety and mental health, youth mental health, has been a live topic of discussion for our program committee. It will feature in the curriculum. I'm not sure in what facet, but we know that is something that young people are eager to talk about and address through this process. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Can I just add one very quick thing on that? It was really interesting point. And we've often, when we've organised assemblies, we've actually provided therapeutic spaces. And what's been really interesting is they've almost never been used because the assembly itself supports each other. It's really an empowering thing, and it's always really surprised me that we actually haven't needed that support. But I think your point is incredibly well taken.
Merci, colleague, for votre engagement.
Thank you for your engagement. And now, Mary.
Wrap up. What a fantastic, absolutely fantastic presentation we've had from our colleagues today. I want to thank you all, Peter, Graham, and Jasmine. It's opened up probably way more questions that we're going to have to be dealing with ourselves, and we know we can count on you. This opportunity is golden, really, for this Canadian Youth Climate Assembly to be receiving as parliamentarians, as members of Senators for Climate Solutions, the results of the deliberations of these young people, and then making, pledging, which we all have to do and find our ways now, to really make sure that it has the best possible impact after we have received those. That's something we as a group will continue to address in smaller groups, et cetera, over the next little while. So colleagues, please, put up your hand if you want to talk further with me about it. I know some of us have already started talking about how we do this. I'd also like to thank all of my colleagues for participating today, and any of you who are online who are not yet members of Senators for Climate Solutions, come on down. We're happy to have you join our group. We have actually, I think we're a little more than half of the Senate now that are members. This is a really wonderful time to be joining us as we plan Senators for Climate Solutions 2.0 to be launched in the fall, alongside this Youth Climate Assembly. So thank you very much to everyone. Merci. Wilalio, thank you.